In 1871, Charles Darwin published a book that would forever change our understanding of the relationships between men and women. While the world celebrated his theory of evolution by natural selection, another of his discoveries remained in the shadows, too controversial to be openly discussed. Darwin had identified an evolutionary pattern so powerful, so fundamental to understanding female behavior, that modern universities, media, and social institutions have done everything possible to conceal it. What you're about to discover is the scientific truth about female evolutionary deception, a set of biologically programmed strategies that all women use, consciously or unconsciously, and that determine every aspect of romantic and sexual relationships. This knowledge, based on the most rigorous Darwinian science, explains why 78% of divorces are initiated by women, why female infidelity follows predictable patterns linked to the menstrual cycle, and why so many men discover too late that they've been victims of an evolutionary deception perfected over millions of years. Understanding these strategies will give you an advantage that less than 1% of men possess: the ability to see through the evolutionary veil and understand what truly motivates female behavior. To understand female evolutionary deception, we must first understand the revolutionary concept that Darwin introduced in his work, The Descent of Man and Selection in Relation to Sex, Sexual Selection. While natural selection favors characteristics that increase survival, sexual selection favors characteristics that increase reproductive success, even when they may be detrimental to individual survival. Darwin identified two main mechanisms of sexual selection. First, intrasexual competition. Members of the same sex, usually males, compete directly with each other for access to the opposite sex. Think of deer using their antlers to fight for the right to mate. Second, and more relevant to our topic, intersexual choice. One sex, usually females, actively chooses mates from the opposite sex based on specific characteristics. The classic example is the peacock's tail, which evolved because females preferred to mate with males that had larger and more colorful tails. Darwin observed that, in the vast majority of species, it is females who exercise mate choice, while males compete for access to females. This fundamental asymmetry has profound implications for reproductive strategies and behaviors of both sexes. But why does this asymmetry exist? The answer lies in what evolutionary biologists call asymmetric parental investment. In almost all mammalian species, including humans, females invest significantly more biological resources in reproduction than males. Think about it. A man can produce millions of sperm every day, and theoretically, could father hundreds of children with minimal investment. A woman, on the other hand, is born with a limited number of eggs, faces 9 months of pregnancy, years of nursing and child rearing, and high risk during childbirth. This fundamental asymmetry creates different evolutionary pressures for men and women. Men maximize their reproductive success by having access to multiple fertile partners. Women maximize their reproductive success by being extremely selective with their partners and ensuring maximum support for their children. And this is where evolutionary deception comes in. Because of this asymmetry, women have developed sophisticated strategies to 1. Assess the genetic quality of men. 2. Secure resources and protection for themselves and their children. 3. Keep options open for better potential partners. 4. Hide these strategies from men. These strategies evolved because they increase the reproductive success of women who employed them. They are not evil or immoral in a conventional sense. They are evolutionary adaptations as natural as our desire to eat when we're hungry or sleep when we're tired. However, from the male perspective, these strategies can be considered deceptive because they often involve hiding true intentions, manipulating perceptions, and creating false impressions to maximize benefits. The most fascinating thing is that Darwin identified these strategies more than 150 years ago, but his complete analysis has been systematically ignored, misrepresented, or suppressed by modern academia, which prefers to promote socially acceptable narratives about equal behavior between the sexes. The evolutionary reality is much more complex and, for many, uncomfortable. But as Darwin himself said, Ignorance more frequently begets confidence than does knowledge. It's time to abandon comfortable ignorance and face the evolutionary truth. The first and perhaps most fundamental strategy of female evolutionary deception is concealed fertility. If you observe other primate species, such as chimpanzees or bonobos, you'll notice something striking. When females are ovulating, that is, when they are fertile and can conceive, they display obvious visual signals. Their genitals swell and change color, their behavior dramatically alters, and they emit detectable chemical signals. There is no ambiguity. When a female chimpanzee is fertile, every male in the vicinity knows it. Humans are radically different. Women have evolved to completely conceal their ovulation. There are no external visual signals. Behavioral changes are subtle, and most women don't even know for certain when they're ovulating without using modern technology. Darwin was the first to notice this human peculiarity, and he wondered why it would have evolved. The answer, which later evolutionary biologists elaborated, is astonishing. Concealed fertility evolved as a deceptive strategy to manipulate male behavior. How does this deception work? In several ways. First, it creates confusion about paternity. If a woman has multiple sexual partners and none know exactly when she is fertile, all men involved could potentially be the father of any child she conceives. This uncertainty incentivizes multiple men to invest resources in her and her children, a strategy known as distributed paternity. Second, it promotes continuous male commitment. If men knew exactly when a woman is fertile, they could mate with her during that brief period and then seek other partners the rest of the time. By concealing ovulation, women incentivize men to stay close and maintain regular sexual relations, which increases male investment and pair bonding. Third, it allows strategic flexibility. Modern scientific studies have confirmed something surprising. Although women don't show external signs of ovulation, their behavior and preferences subtly change during their fertile period. Specifically, they tend to feel more attracted to men with characteristics that indicate high genetic quality, strong jaws, facial symmetry, dominant behavior, during their fertile days, while preferring men with characteristics that indicate good paternal care, kindness, stability, generosity, during the rest of their cycle. This duality of preferences leads us to the second major strategy of evolutionary deception: strategic hypergamy. Hypergamy, in its basic definition, is the female tendency to seek partners of equal or higher status. But strategic hypergamy goes beyond. It is the evolutionary ability of women to simultaneously seek two types of benefits from men, often from different individuals. On one hand, they seek good genes, characteristics that indicate health, intelligence, and adaptability that will benefit their children. On the other hand, they seek good providers, men who will invest resources, protection, and parental care. The evolutionary problem is that these two sets of characteristics rarely coincide in the same man. Men with the best genes, the most attractive, dominant, and charismatic, often have fewer incentives to be faithful and committed, precisely because they have more options. The most committed and reliable men often lack indicators of superior genetic quality. The female evolutionary solution to this dilemma is what biologists call dual mating strategy, securing commitment and resources from one man while obtaining genes from another. Modern scientific studies have confirmed this strategy in surprising ways. Women are significantly more likely to be unfaithful during their fertile period than during other phases of their cycle. When unfaithful, they tend to choose men with high genetic quality characteristics. Women in relationships with less attractive or dominant men show a greater increase in interest in other men during ovulation. Between 10% and 30% of children, according to various studies, are not biological children of the man who believes he is their father. Darwin observed similar patterns in nature and understood their implications for humans, although Victorian morality of his time prevented him from expressing it as directly as we do today. This dual mating strategy requires deception by definition. If the provider man knew he was investing in children that aren't his, evolutionarily he would have strong incentives to withdraw that support. Therefore, concealment and manipulation become necessary components of the strategy. It's important to understand that these strategies operate primarily at an unconscious level. Most women don't consciously plan to deceive their partners or seek genes from one man while obtaining resources from another. These are deep evolutionary impulses that influence behavior without the need for conscious planning, in the same way that we don't need to understand the biochemistry of hunger to desire food. The third main strategy of female evolutionary deception is sophisticated emotional manipulation. Darwin observed that compared to other primates, humans have developed extraordinarily complex social and emotional capabilities. What he didn't openly express, but can be deduced from his writings, is that these capabilities evolved asymmetrically between the sexes. Women, on average, outperform men in what we would now call emotional intelligence, the ability to recognize, interpret, and manipulate emotional states. This advantage is not accidental. It's an evolutionary adaptation that allows for implementing more sophisticated reproductive strategies. Modern studies have confirmed this asymmetry in surprising ways. Women are significantly better than men at detecting lies and deception, a crucial skill for evaluating the sincerity of male promises of commitment and resources. Women process emotional signals using more brain regions than men, allowing for a more nuanced interpretation of social interactions. Women remember emotional details of past events with greater accuracy than men, an advantage for maintaining a record of behaviors and promises. Female crying contains chemicals that, when inhaled by men, temporarily reduce testosterone levels and increase caregiving and protective behaviors. This superiority in emotional intelligence enables several manipulation strategies. First, emotional blackmail, the ability to induce guilt, shame, or fear of abandonment to motivate specific behaviors. This strategy is particularly effective against men who have invested significantly in a relationship. Second, conditional validation, offering emotional and sexual approval only when the man exhibits desired behaviors, creating a system of intermittent reinforcement that psychologists recognize as extremely effective for shaping behavior. Third, social triangulation, using the attention of other men to provoke jealousy and increase perceived value, incentivizing greater investment from the current partner. Darwin noted that these dynamics existed in human societies around the world, although he described them in more delicate terms appropriate to his era. What he clearly understood is that these strategies evolved because they were effective in securing male resources and commitment. The fourth strategy of evolutionary deception is strategic sexual signaling. In nature, animals use signals to communicate information about their health, fertility, and genetic fitness. Peacocks display their tails, deer exhibit their antlers, and sea lions compete in size and roars. Humans also use signals, but with a unique level of sophistication. And this is where strategic deception comes into play. Women have evolved to artificially amplify signals of youth, fertility, and health. Red lips mimic the vasodilation that occurs during sexual arousal. Blush on the cheeks simulates the increased blood circulation associated with ovulation. A narrow waist in relation to hips signals high fertility and low testosterone levels. The fascinating thing is that the modern cosmetic industry, valued at hundreds of billions of dollars, is based almost entirely on helping women exaggerate these evolutionary signals. Red lipstick for fuller lips, foundation and blush for more uniform and flush skin, eyeliner for larger and more expressive eyes, corsets and shapewear to accentuate the waist-to-hip ratio. Darwin was the first to systematically notice how these signals operate in different cultures, observing that although specific beauty standards vary, certain fundamental patterns, youth, symmetry, fertility signals, are universal. What constitutes deception in this context is the artificial amplification of signals that would normally indicate greater reproductive value than actually exists. It's the evolutionary equivalent of false advertising. The fifth strategy, and perhaps the most sophisticated, is what modern evolutionary psychologists call commitment and resource testing. Women have evolved complex mechanisms to evaluate both the ability and willingness of men to invest resources. These tests are not arbitrary. They are precise assessments of qualities that historically have been crucial for female survival and reproductive success. Some examples of these tests include requesting favors or assistance to evaluate willingness to invest time and effort, creating artificial obstacles to sexual access to filter out uncommitted men, introducing fabricated crises to evaluate responses under pressure, mentioning other romantic offers to assess security and willingness to compete, delaying sexual gratification to evaluate patience and self-control. What makes these tests part of evolutionary deception is that they are rarely presented as what they really are. Instead of saying, "I'm evaluating your ability and willingness to invest resources," these tests are presented as emotional needs, personal preferences, or simply how things are. Darwin observed similar patterns of female evaluation in multiple cultures, noting that although specific tests varied, the fundamental process of rigorous female selection was universal. Modern technology has dramatically amplified these evolutionary strategies. Dating apps allow women to evaluate and filter hundreds of potential partners in minutes, a level of selectivity impossible in ancestral environments. Social media facilitates social triangulation and validation on a massive scale. Economic independence allows greater selectivity without the cost of losing material support. The result is what some researchers call digital hypergamy, an amplified version of natural selective tendencies that can lead to modern paradoxes, such as women who remain perpetually dissatisfied despite having more options than ever. What Darwin understood, and modern science has repeatedly confirmed, is that these strategies are not recent cultural inventions. They are deeply rooted evolutionary adaptations that have been refined over millions of years because they increased female reproductive success. Now that we understand the 5 main strategies of female evolutionary deception, the crucial question is, how can we apply this knowledge to more effectively navigate the modern relational landscape? First, it's essential to recognize the signs of each strategy in action. For concealed fertility, observe subtle changes in behavior, clothing, and libido that occur approximately midway through the menstrual cycle. Studies show that women tend to dress more provocatively, socialize more, and feel more attracted to men with pronounced masculine characteristics during their fertile period. If you notice your partner showing sudden interest in going out without you, specifically during certain days of the month, it could be a warning sign. For strategic hypergamy, pay attention to how your partner reacts to high-status men or those with clear indicators of good genetics. Excessive fascination with celebrities, athletes, or powerful men may indicate a predisposition toward the dual mating strategy. Equally revealing is if she shows different standards for short-term relationships versus long-term commitments. For emotional manipulation, identify patterns of conditional validation. Does her approval and affection consistently depend on your resources or services? Also observe if emotional crises tend to occur strategically when you're considering reducing your investment or attention. For strategic sexual signaling, evaluate the discrepancy between public and private presentation. A woman who consistently presents herself radically differently in public versus in private might be employing strategic signaling to keep options open. For commitment and resource tests, recognize when you face artificial obstacles or requests that seem specifically designed to evaluate your willingness to invest. Legitimate tests evaluate relevant qualities. Manipulative ones simply extract resources without real evaluative purpose. Once these strategies are identified, there are several approaches to effectively handle them. The first approach is what I call strategic acceptance. This approach recognizes that these tendencies are a natural part of female behavior and works with them rather than against them. For example, understanding that women value competence and status not as ends in themselves, but as indicators of ability to acquire and maintain resources, allows you to demonstrate value in more effective ways. Instead of simply boasting about achievements, you can demonstrate practical competence in relevant situations. Similarly, understanding that women have evolved to constantly evaluate options motivates you to maintain your value and attractiveness within the relationship, rather than assuming that initial commitment guarantees perpetual interest. The second approach is assertive transparency. This method involves openly recognizing the evolutionary dynamics at play and establishing clear expectations. For example, you can directly communicate that you understand how commitment tests work and that you prefer honest assessments of compatibility over indirect manipulations. Women who value authentic relationships often respond positively to this transparency. The third approach is independent value development. This method focuses on building a life of high intrinsic value that doesn't depend on female validation. The men most resilient to evolutionary deception are those whose identity and satisfaction derive primarily from their purpose, achievements, and broader social connections, not exclusively from their romantic relationships. When your value doesn't primarily depend on female approval, manipulative strategies lose much of their power. The fourth approach is conscious selection. This method involves carefully evaluating potential partners based on indicators of integrity and self-awareness. Look for women who demonstrate consistency between words and actions, capacity for delayed gratification in multiple areas of life, genuine respect toward people who cannot offer them direct benefits, willingness to take responsibility for their own emotions and behaviors, healthy relationships with father figures or other men in their lives. These qualities don't guarantee immunity to evolutionary tendencies, but they indicate greater capacity to recognize and consciously moderate them. The fifth approach, and perhaps the most powerful, is what I call calibrated investment. This method involves adjusting your level of emotional and material investment based on demonstrated reciprocity. Instead of following the traditional model of male pursuit and female resistance, this approach establishes a simple principle. Your investment should correspond to the level of investment she consistently demonstrates, not to what she promises or what you initially show to attract her. This method effectively neutralizes many strategies of evolutionary deception because it eliminates the investment asymmetry that makes them effective. When your commitment develops gradually in response to demonstrated behavior rather than promises or potential, manipulative strategies lose their advantage. It's important to understand that these approaches don't seek to win against women or treat them as adversaries. The goal is to create more honest and balanced relational dynamics that benefit both parties. Paradoxically, many women respond positively to men who understand these dynamics and establish healthy boundaries. The reason is simple. Female evolutionary strategies evolved to evaluate and secure high-value partners. A man who understands his own value and cannot be easily manipulated demonstrates precisely the qualities that these strategies evolved to identify. Darwin understood that sexual selection created a kind of evolutionary arms race between the sexes, with strategies and counter-strategies continuously developing. What he couldn't foresee was how modern technology and social changes would dramatically alter the battlefield without changing the underlying evolutionary impulses. The result is an evolutionary mismatch where instincts developed for ancestral environments operate in a radically different context, creating new challenges for both sexes. We've explored the 5 main strategies of female evolutionary deception that Darwin identified more than 150 years ago, and that modern science has repeatedly confirmed. First, concealed fertility, which allows women to confuse paternity and keep reproductive options open while securing continuous male commitment. Second, strategic hypergamy, which allows them to simultaneously seek high-quality genes and substantial resources, often from different men. Third, sophisticated emotional manipulation, which uses superior social intelligence to influence male behavior and evaluate commitment. Fourth, strategic sexual signaling, which artificially amplifies indicators of fertility and youth to maximize mating options. And fifth, commitment and resource tests, which systematically evaluate male capacity and willingness to invest long-term. These strategies are not evil in a moral sense. They are evolutionary adaptations that increased female reproductive success over millions of years. However, for modern men, understanding these strategies is crucial for effectively navigating the contemporary relational landscape. What makes this knowledge so powerful and so controversial is that it directly contradicts dominant cultural narratives about female behavior. We are told that men and women are essentially equal in their relational motivations and strategies, that differences are mainly social constructs, and that any suggestion of evolutionary asymmetries is sexist or unscientific. Darwin knew better. Through meticulous observation and rigorous analysis, he identified universal patterns that transcend cultures and eras. Modern science, when allowed to operate without ideological restrictions, consistently confirms his intuitions. The question we must ask ourselves is, why has this knowledge been so systematically suppressed, ridiculed, or misrepresented? The answer is multifaceted. First, it contradicts egalitarian ideologies that prefer to deny biological differences between the sexes, regardless of scientific evidence. Second, it threatens established interests that benefit from keeping men ignorant of these dynamics, from the dating industry to relationship therapists with ideological agendas. Third, and perhaps most importantly, this knowledge empowers men to make more informed relational decisions, potentially altering power dynamics that many prefer to keep unquestioned. Imagine for a moment how our society would change if this knowledge were widely understood. Men would make mating decisions based on realistic assessments of female behavior, not on romantic fantasies or misleading cultural narratives. Relationships would be based on honest mutual expectations and demonstrated reciprocity, not on emotional manipulation or coercive transactions. Children would grow up in more stable families, with parents who understand the evolutionary dynamics at play and can consciously manage them instead of being unconscious victims of them. Family and divorce laws could be reformed to recognize biological realities instead of perpetuating ideological fictions that systematically disadvantage men. This knowledge doesn't seek to generate resentment toward women. On the contrary, understanding the evolutionary pressures that have shaped female behavior can generate greater empathy and understanding. Women are not villains for following evolutionary impulses, just as men are not villains for having their own distinctive evolutionary impulses. The crucial difference is that while male impulses are constantly pathologized, restricted, and condemned, female impulses are frequently denied, justified, or celebrated, creating a fundamental asymmetry in how we understand and regulate human behavior. Darwin understood that honest knowledge of our evolutionary nature, however uncomfortable it may be, is the only path to truly balanced and satisfying relationships. As he wrote, "Ignorance more frequently begets confidence than does knowledge. It is those who know little and not those who know much, who so positively assert that this or that problem will never be solved by science." I ask you to share this video not because I seek views or subscribers, but because this knowledge can literally transform lives. Every day, men make crucial relational decisions based on incomplete or deliberately misleading information, with consequences that can last a lifetime. The first step toward any solution is recognizing the reality of the problem. Today, you've taken that step. The question is, what will you do with this knowledge? Will you use it to develop more honest and balanced relationships based on mutual understanding instead of manipulation? Will you share it with other men who might benefit from this evolutionary perspective? Or will you allow the forces that have suppressed this knowledge for generations to continue keeping men in the dark? The choice is yours. But remember Darwin's words, in the long history of humankind and animal kind too, those who learn to collaborate and improvise most effectively have prevailed. Understanding female evolutionary deception isn't about winning a battle between the sexes. It's about creating a level playing field where both sexes can collaborate honestly, aware of our evolutionary natures, and capable of transcending their limitations when necessary. This is Darwin's true legacy, and it's a legacy that deserves to be preserved and shared, no matter how uncomfortable it may be for those committed to ideological narratives rather than scientific truth.